we set priorities, and our priorities are in our education funding. For example, Chairman Clark's proposal on K through 12 funding is to fund it at a level that level funds K through 12 in 13 versus 12, plus the additional $17.9 million that is the increase in the full funding of MAEP that was requested by the State Department of Education, plus in Chairman Clark's budget we fully fund the roughly $5 million for high growth districts. My opinion and our opinion is that if you're going to have a funding formula that is based on student population, it ought to be based on the most as accurate numbers as is possible, and because of that we fully fund the high growth districts in our budget. So in aggregate, K through 12 funding receives almost or a little under $30 million more in fiscal year 2013 under our proposal, $23 million above FY 2012 levels. But I also want to point out that we didn't fund it at the expense of our other educational initiatives, community colleges and IHL. If you look at our funding levels for IHL and community colleges, again, those levels are nearly identical to the level at which they were funded in FY 2012. And so as you look at what many of them expected to be pretty significant cuts to community colleges and IHL, we were able to level fund in our budget proposal. But I'd also point out this. It has been a practice in the past to intentionally underfund certain areas like Medicaid, like debt service. In this budget, we do not do that. We fund Medicaid at the fiscal year 2012 levels, which is $764 million. And with debt service, we actually funded debt service at a level that's $40 million greater in general fund monies this year in fiscal year 13 compared to 12. So we funded debt service rather than at $384 plus million at $424 plus million. So there are no known deficits in this budget, and I think there's a whole lot to be said for that. We also, in comparison to the Joint Legislative Budget Committee recommendation back in November, December, there evidently was some confusion regarding certain monies at the State Department of Health. We actually replenished the State Department of Health to last year's level plus an additional $700,000. So they actually have a slight increase as opposed to about the 20% decrease or 30% decrease that they were looking at under the Joint Legislative Budget Committee recommendation. And so we know that we still have a lot of work to do over the next several years to get our budget in line with where it needs to be. But because there is still a need for cuts, that's why, in my view, it's so important to give agency heads the maximum amount of flexibility to manage their agencies. That's why the State Senate has passed a number of bills over the last couple of months to take individuals out from underneath the personnel board, but also why we have done things in the budget process to give agency heads lump sum authority. Because if you're going to mandate savings, then we need to give our agency heads the maximum amount of flexibility to do that. And in Chairman Clark's budget, that's exactly what he's done. And I will just conclude my prepared remarks and turn it over to Senator Clark if he would like to say a few things by saying, in the last 60 days, we have had an extremely expansive education reform measures in the State Senate. But it's important, as I've said all along, we've got to reform education so as to improve educational outcomes, but we also must invest in the public education system that we have. And that's why we were able to set those priorities and actually spend about 23 or 24 million dollars more in 13 than was provided in 12.